Hello everybody. How are you today? How is your summer holiday? Can you type in the chat box what are you doing and what are you going to do during this long day off? Or kind of, it's not a day off, it's a weekend, a long weekend. What are you going to do at the weekend? 3 days off. Maybe you have like a limitless days off. That's why it's cool. Otherwise, that's not. So I will check our chat. Okay. So today we are going to focus a little bit on effective communication. And 1 hour webinar, we will be talking and we'll be communicating about simply communication. Communication, effective communication. So let's pencil in the agenda of today's webinar. We are going to have a look at the effective communication, the principles, rules, and tips, and potential problems connected with communication. Also, we are going to have a look at miscommunication. Okay. Also, we are going to concentrate a little bit on miscommunication and talk about a little bit verbal and non-verbal communication. Okay, so can you please type in the chat box what is communication and what do you think it means to communicate with people? You can use a chat box to help you. So what is communication and what do people usually do to communicate? So while you are typing, let's have a look together. Communication is simply the act of transferring information from one person or group to another one. Every communication involves at least one sender and one recipient, and a message between them. But communication is not just as simple as a sender, recipient, and the message between them. It's much more a complex phenomenon, as we can see. The transmission of the message from sender to recipient can be affected by a huge range of things. These include our emotions, cultural settings or cultural background, the medium used to communicate, I will explain that, and our location. So about the medium, different mediums can be used to communicate. For example, we can use either written language, speaking, or other stuff. I will explain a little bit later which stuff are the most, which kinds of communication mediums are popular while communicating. So when speaking about the complexity, is why good communication skills are considered to be so desirable by employers around the world. So the communication, the message, or the communication itself has to be accurate, has to be effective, and unambiguous. What it means? Accurate information is when you present correct and appropriate information to everybody. Okay, yeah, Vlad, very good. Communication is exchanging information between two people. Very nice. Yeah, that's right. So accurate information is reached only when you is reached only when you distance yourself from a source of information. So when you heard somewhere this information, or you listened to it, or you found somewhere this information, and you pretended to be your own information, pretend yourself to be the only source of this information, that's um, probably can play an evil trick with you, and can negatively affect the effectiveness of your communication. That's why, to be accurate and to be always appropriate, you have to use special constructions. Maybe during your English studying you have learned these constructions. They are called impersonal passive constructions or distancing constructions. These include, it is generally believed, or it's generally acknowledged, or it is thought to be, it is considered to be, it is thought to be, or whatever. So these are the most widespread ways to distance yourself from the source of information in order to transform your message to be as correct and as accurate as possible. This is the way. What about effectiveness? So about the effectiveness of communication, we are going to dig a little bit deeper during our webinar. And yeah, effectiveness of the community. And what about the being unambiguous? Being unambiguous is simply being straightforward. So you are not the artist and you are not the writer, so everybody has to dig a little bit deeper and find out the what you wanted to say between the lines. Nobody wants to read between the lines your message. You have to be extremely straightforward. Your words has to have direct meaning, and generally your message has to be directly sent to the recipient. What about the effectiveness of our message? We are going, of course, to look at it a little bit deeper and to have a look at some tips how to make your message as effective as possible. But it's simply using the devices, using the tools to make your message send directly to the recipient. It means that the recipient has to perfectly and explicitly understand your message within the least amount of words, within the least amount of phrases used in your message, or exponents used in your message. That's the effectiveness. And of course, the feedback. The feedback is when we exchange information. So to combine all these three stuff, effectiveness, accuracy, and unambiguity, is extremely hard. That's why it's demanded and thought after around the world. So, here. So as this definition makes clear, communication is more than simply the transmission of information. The term requires an element of success in transmitting or imparting a message, whether information, ideas, or emotions. A communication, therefore, has three parts: the sender, the message, and the recipient. So what's communication? It's not only speaking. No, as I said before, that's also emotions. That's also some. So generally, that's behavior. everything can be considered everything can be considered communication when you have a close touch with another person, when you start speaking, typing, chatting, touching, or whatever. That's communication, because you are sending a signal that the recipient has to decode. So the sender encodes the message, usually in a mixture of words or nonverbal communication. It's transmitted in some way, for example, in speech or writing, and the recipient has to decode it. So with the help of verbal and nonverbal stuff, we are able to have this programming language to program our message, so the recipient has to decode it, simply to decode it. Of course, there may be more than one recipient, and the complexity of communication means that each one may receive a slightly different message. Two people may read very different things into the choice of words and body language. It's also possible that neither of them will have quite the same understanding as the sender. In face-to-face communication, the roles of the sender and recipient are not explicit. The two roles will pass back and forwards between two people talking. Both parties communicate with each other, even if in very subtle way, such as through eye contact or lack of eye contact, or in general body language or paralanguage. In written communication, however, the sender and recipient are more distinct. So what I wanted to say, that nowadays we don't have, not nowadays, but generally we don't have special labels that I'm a sender and you are a recipient. When having the dialogue between each other, we pass these roles back and forth. We either listen, or we talk, or we send a message, simply send a message. That's why we don't have certain roles. What I also wanted to add, there is a very good and very outstanding researcher David Crystal. If you have heard about him or about his works, can you type in the chat box that you have read some works or some pieces of work? Transferring it from one group to another, very good. Yeah, Vlad and Robert, very nice. That's cool. So when where was I? Okay, yeah, so David Crystal. Nowadays, we don't have only face-to-face communication, and we don't have a dialogue or even for three people together speaking. Internet has created created the possibility, and which is dramatically averse to our human nature. It's not natural to have a chat which consists of 30, 40, 50, and even 100 people together speaking and exchanging information. It's just beyond our nature to do that. But our brain adapted to this situation and adapted to today's conditions, and something our brain, it filtrates something we read and we react, we exchange information, and there develops the communication between a man more than 30 people or whatever, which is kind of unnatural. And internet has brought out this impossible, unbelievable phenomenon. Okay, good. So of course there may be more. Okay, so we have discussed this one. So let's have a look at categories of communication, or which communication we can have. There is, of course, a wide range of ways in which we communicate. And the first one is, of course, the traditional and conventional one, like spoken or verbal communication, which includes face-to-face, mobile phone, telephone, radio, or television, or other media. Simply with this, with the help of our verbal tools. Another one is non-verbal communication, and we're going to have a look at it in more details. It covers body language, gestures, how we dress, act, how we stand, our posture, and even our scent, so our perfume. There are many subtle ways that we communicate unintentionally with others. For example, the tone of voice, the pitch of voice can give clues about our mood and emotional state, whilst hand signals or gestures can add to a spoken message. What about our written communication? So the internet has given us the possibility to communicate simply with the written message, which is kind of also adverse to our human nature, but still we can do it and quite successfully, which includes letters, emails, social media, books, magazines, the internet, and other media. Until recent times, a relatively small number of writers and publishers were very powerful when it came to communicating the written word. Today, we can all write and publish our ideas online, which has led to an explosion of information and communication possibilities. Here, I would like to stop a little bit at the power of the written word and the communication that creative people can send, and the communication that the creative people can keep with their audience and with the message they are able to send. So having, for example, when speaking about artists, they, with the help of simply drawing or painting, they are able to send a very powerful message to everybody. Do you know of course, you know Pablo Picasso. Pablo Picasso is a Spanish artist, and his one work was considered to be a very powerful message, which was supported by millions of people around the world. Simply just the painting. He didn't have any blurb for their article, for his painting. He didn't have any kind of following message to explain his painting. He had after a German army bombarded the Spanish town during the First World War. He was kind of very shocked and flabbergasted about this issue. So he wanted to express his feelings, his protest, with the help of the painting, and he painted Guernica. Guernica now is a very big canvas, or it's like spread around the wall, and it serves a very explicit example of how the communication can be so powerful without even words, without even the written word, without even communicating, with just simply a painting. He showed the ruins of the bombarded town. He showed the death that he saw in this town. And so the people stood up for their rights, for their peaceful way of life. Furthermore, to talk about the powerful message of the writers, you can find millions and zillions of examples how writers send us powerful messages. But the first one that springs to my mind is Francis Scott Fitzgerald and his tragedy, tragedy novel, The Great Gatsby. Sometimes his work is compared to Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, and a lot of people and it's read a very powerful message, even between the lines, but still millions of people felt it, millions of people decoded it, and that's why they were and that's why his message captured the imagination of millions of people around the world, even nowadays. He sent the message with the help of his Great Gatsby that following the unworthy, desirable aim, unworthy, desirable goal will lead always to despair. So don't do that. Don't if it's unworthy, that it's not worth your attention, it's not worth your efforts and everything. When I have mentioned the Shakespearean works of art, he also was the master, and probably he began this. He set this trend of sending the message through the works of art. The period when Shakespeare lived was kind of very difficult for people, for ordinary people, and he always, when some issue appeared in at that time, like economic some conditions, some problems with people, with slavery, with buying people, with some kings and queens, he usually wrote some works like Henry VIII or Taming the Shrew, Romeo and Juliet. So every work was his expression against some of the issues happening in society. People read between the lines. People got the hand off of his works. Besides, he was considered to be the master of ambiguity. So somehow he changed the words. Somehow he hid the initial purpose, initial message of his works, and he hid the message, but still the people were able to decode it. And so he was like every work was connected with some of the issue happening at that time. Still, there are the whole gamut of expressing or your emotions, or of communicating with much more people than who surround you. Okay. So the sense of communication is the reaction it causes. That's totally right. A misunderstanding can occur at any stage of the communication process. Effective communication involves minimizing potential misunderstanding and overcoming any barriers to communication at each stage in the communication process. An effective communicator understands An effective communicator understands their audience, chooses an appropriate communication channel, hones their message for this particular channel, and encodes the message effectively to reduce misunderstanding by the recipients. They will also seek out feedback from the recipients to ensure that the message is understood and attempt to correct any misunderstanding or confusion as soon as possible. Receivers can use techniques such as clarification and reflection as effective ways to ensure that the message sent has been understood correctly. A message or communication is sent by the sender through a communication channel to a receiver or to multiple receivers. The sender must encode the message into a form that is appropriate to the communication channel, and the receiver that it decodes the message to understand its meaning and significance. Misunderstanding can occur at probably any stage. That's fine. Yeah. Communication channels is the term to the way in which we communicate. It's therefore the method used to transmit our message to a recipient or to receive a message from someone else. There are multiple communication channels available to us today. These include face-to-face conversations, telephone calls, text messages, emails, the internet, radio and TV, written letters, brochures and reports, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, multiple choices. So the stuff is like that. Can you please, after that, I would like to stop a little bit at such topic as miscommunication or misunderstanding. Can you please type in the chat box what is miscommunication in our life? And maybe you have some funny stories or surprising stories connected with miscommunication. I'm waiting for you. Funny stories about miscommunication. So miscommunication is the process when the recipient decodes your message incorrectly. Yeah. So the first stuff I would like to stop is the miscommunication in multicultural context or multicultural settings. Our environment isn't just the air we breathe or the food we eat. A big part of our environment is culture. Culture is made up of the common things that members of a community learn from family, friends, media, literature, and even strangers. These are the things that influence how they look, act, and communicate. Often we even don't know we are learning these things because they become second nature to us. For instance, the way you shake hands with someone when you meet. What food you eat every day, the kind of things you find funny, or how you view religion, how you perceive time. So these stuff are drastically different from culture to culture. There was a cultural iceberg that was created by Edward T. Hall in the 20th century. And he explained that we have our culture is an iceberg, and the way we perceive it is according to this iceberg. For example, the iceberg is 10 is at the top. Yeah, it's small. It's like 10% of the iceberg, but at the bottom we have 90% of our iceberg, of size of our iceberg. So in this 10% of the cultural iceberg, there are the cultural stuff that we can explicitly see. For example, some customs, traditions, clothes, habits, some kind of greetings, gestures, the body language that they use. So the stuff that you can explicitly see when communicating with a person for the first time. But if we go to this 90% iceberg, these are stuff that are implicit, that can't be distantly seen when you meet the person. These are time perceptions, customs, some customs, some beliefs, mindset, attitudes, humor, sense of humor, some kind of attitudes to life, and some things that can't be interpreted when you meet the person for the first time. So these are the 90% of the iceberg. That's why some misunderstandings because of this 90% of the iceberg can appear in the multicultural settings. When a person is forced to communicate with the representative of a foreign country, people of a different ethnic background, or what's more, translators or interpreters, often enter a culture that is different from the translator's one. Sometimes these cultures may be even contradictory. What may be perfectly normal in one culture, for example, spending hours to have lunch, or to hug or to kiss when you meet the person, might be unusual and even unexpectable for the cultures that value time or has this stuff as a taboo. So another instance of the most recurrent ethnic bound culture shock is a lack of awareness why hearing words alone is not sufficient to discern meaning. Sometimes silence communicates far more than speech. Such things as touching, eye contact, and other nonverbal stuff, a kind of eye contact, your body language need to be observed and understood correctly. Because, for example, nonverbal communication carries important clues about the message that the individual tries to convey. Unlike the European people, Asians consider it rude to meet gazes too long, to keep eye contact too long. However, it's just the opposite in some Western countries. So when a Westerner meets an Asian, the Asian thinks that the Westerner is rude while gazing too long, while the Westerner thinks that the Asian is sneaky because he doesn't keep eye contact. Yes, so here is the dilemma between the cultures. People may misinterpret the motives of their colloquiators with a different ethnic background. For example, one group may assume that they are simply exchanging information about what they believe, but the other believes that they are negotiating a change in behavior. This is most likely to arise when the parties are not completely honest with each other from the outset. Individuals may wish to protect their privacy, corporations may be concerned about industrial espionage, and politicians may be bound by requirements of secrecy in the national interest. Nevertheless, clarifying the purpose of the interaction is essential to eliminating confusion, particularly if vested interests are involved. So the first trick and rule which is important to avoid miscommunication is to not to send, but to express the sole objective of your communication. So our today's aim is to find out the ways to solve the problem, but not just going around it, not tiptoeing around this issue. So okay, fine. Friction may also arise between two people when one or both have little knowledge of the other's background. So another problem, For example, in Paris, when out for a morning walk, you say bonjour to everyone you meet, to everyone. And other people will say you bonjour in response. And it's totally fine. But if you do it in New York, people will scurry away from you because it's another culture, because it's not appropriate to greet everybody that you can see on the road. on the street. Um, greeting people with the warm handshake is both friendly and polite in Western countries like our country, but some of them even hug the strangers when they meet to express this friendliness or friendly motive during the communication. However, Eastern countries will consider the obvious show of display to be very rude and to be even a taboo in Eastern countries. So kissing in the cheek somebody and hugging is a taboo for Eastern countries. So the being savvy about some basic principles and rules of cultural communication is essential in diplomacy, is essential to be diplomatic, and it is essential to not to get into the trap of different cultures. That was my kind of message for you. What I wanted also to tell you about the other tricks. So first of all, I mentioned about expressing the sole objective of your communication. The second one is to be somehow savvy and to be prepared for some basic rules of communication in different countries. Another one is be diplomatic about some problems that might arise during your communication. Always be diplomatic, try to iron problems down because of the misunderstanding of different cultures, which is quite important. Another rule which like should be followed is knowing the culture, is knowing some basic greeting stuff to show that you are familiar with the culture. Another rule is don't pretend to know everything about their culture. You are not the member of their culture, and you have no right to pretend to be a representative, like over knowing their rules and over knowing their principles of communication. And that also can be rude, and nobody will kind of treat you as a member of their society like that. Okay, it's widely held that cultural psychology offers means by which people of different ethnic background may interact without prejudice. With the advent of internet, while retaining their with the advent of internet, an even more important purpose may arise, allowing whole cultures to interact while retaining their ethnic identity. So that was the thing I was talking about. Also, don't look through cultural lenses. Don't be prejudiced, and don't think with the help of solely with the help of these prejudices and some generalizations about different countries. So here you can find some more causes of miscommunication. Experience make it easier to cope with the difficulties of ethnic-bound culture shock. Some common strategies used to make the transition easier are learning about the country and its culture through reading, studying the language, or attending cultural classes. This way, the country and its people become more familiar. One is more aware of the differences and better prepared to deal with them. Yeah. If the translator doesn't want to get engaged in cultural misunderstanding, he or she needs to be open-minded about the culture of people he or she communicates with and its unfamiliar aspects. People from different ethnic backgrounds encode and decode messages differently, increasing the chances of misunderstanding. So the safety first consequence of recognizing cultural differences should be to assume that everyone's thoughts and actions are not just like ours. Always be prepared for that and always be prepared to deal with them. The only way to deal with them is being diplomatic, not just like fighting about some cultural misunderstanding. Everybody will just gain, or everybody will stand their ground, and nobody won't give up their ground. That's why being diplomatic is the right thing to do. So let's have a look at some examples. Japan. Speaking about Japan, consistent with most descriptions of Japanese negotiating behavior, their style of interaction is among the least aggressive or the most polite. Threats, commands, and warnings appear to be de-emphasized in favor of the more positive promises, recommendations, and commitments. Particularly indicative of their polite conversational style was their frequent use of no and you and facial gazing, as well as more frequent silent periods. So speaking about the Japanese culture, they are the most polite colloquiators that you could find. They have five language, it's like styles of politeness, and they always avoid the word I. No, they will tell you bunch of the constructions to avoid saying no in a very obscure and ambiguous way. So be careful. Also, be careful that Japanese people will keep silence as long as possible, um, just because they it's normal. It's normal in their country. So when you get stuck in the silence while communicating with somebody, don't feel inconvenient, because for Ukrainians it's very inconvenient to have these pauses. Speaking about Korea, Korean negotiators used considerably more commands than did the Japanese. Koreans used the word no and interrupted more than 3 times as frequently as the Japanese. Moreover, no silent periods occurred between Korean negotiators. So the thing I wanted to say about Korean, time is money, and you have to know that. What about China? China, the behaviors of the negotiators from China were most remarkable in the emphasis on asking questions. Indeed, 70% of the statements made by the Chinese negotiators were classified as information exchange tactics. So they are very inquisitive. They like asking questions. So be prepared to be interrupted. While interruption is rude for some countries, interruption for another countries is absolutely normal, because it's their way to to know whether they interpreted your message correctly or not. It's like tech questions, but with the interruption. So be prepared. Okay, what about the European countries? So we have done with the Eastern countries. What about the European countries? Russia. The Russian style was quite different from that of any other European group. And indeed was quite similar in many respects to the style that Japanese people have. They used no and you infrequently and used the most silent periods of any groups. Only the Japanese did less facial gazing, and only the Chinese asked a greater percentage of questions. So Russians and Ukrainians are very similar to each other, and so we have the same style of communication. So be prepared. Be prepared. We are those people. Be prepared just to communicate with other representatives of cultural backgrounds, because interruptions are not so familiar to us, and it's considered to be rude when you interrupt. When you ask also too many questions, it's also considered to be a little bit kind of rude, that you were not listening to the person. But in some countries, that's totally okay. What about Germany? The behaviors of the Germans are difficult to characterize. However, the Germans were exceptional in the high percentage of self-disclosure, 47%, and the low percentage of questions, about 11%. So the disclosure, I wanted to tell you about the disclosure a little bit. The disclosure is showing the emotions, showing the something about yourself, about showing your personality to shine through their communication. What about the United Kingdom? United Kingdom, the behaviors of the British negotiators were remarkably similar to those of the Americans in all respects. British people believe that most British negotiators have a strong sense of the right way to negotiate and the wrong. Protocol is of great importance. However, the right way to negotiate may be completely different concept for people from different cultures. Some cultures may consider the British negotiation style as extremely cold and arrogant. But it's a protocol. Don't be offended. Spain. Oh, Spain is quite interesting. Digam is perhaps a good metaphor for the Spanish approach to negotiations. Diga is speak, 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 speak. Yeah. When you make a phone call in Madrid, the usual greeting on the other end is not hola, hello, but is instead diga, speak, speak, speak. Yeah. It's not surprising then that the Spaniards in the videotape negotiations likewise use the highest percentage of commands, 70% of any other groups, and gave comparatively little information, self-disclosure, comparatively little information about themselves, yes, self-disclosure. Moreover, they interrupted one another more frequently than any other group, and they used the terms no and you very frequently. So as we can see from my explanation, that Spanish people, they want, they just interrupt every time when they didn't understand something, and they command. Yeah, so they are very unambiguous, just straightforward people, wanting to know about everything. Okay, France. The style of the other French negotiators was perhaps the most aggressive of all the groups. In particular, they used the highest percentage of threats and warnings. They also used interruptions, facial gazing, and no and you very frequently compared with the other groups. And one of the French negotiators touched his partner on the arm during the simulation. So the French people are considered to be the most aggressive. The previous group of students told me that they had situations when French people didn't want, they just ignored when you spoke English. They ignored foreigners, and they didn't like to communicate with the representatives of different cultures. So they are a little bit arrogant. They are very self-concentrated, and they think that they look down on other cultures, which is quite not very good. Yeah. And what about the United States? Like the Germans and the British, the Americans fell in the middle of most continuum. People from United States, they interrupt one another less frequently than all the others, but that was the distinction, that they interrupted. Sometimes they can be considered to be a bit cold, a bit cold, but overall they are quite good. So what I wanted to tell you about a trick that will save your life while communicating. Of course, there are a lot of shy people, and if they have their own opinion, they won't express it because they don't want to they don't want to provoke some conflict and some arguments. So the way to avoid these fights is by being assertive. Assertive doesn't mean aggressive. Have a look at some of the situations of how to be assertive. Scenario A. Someone cuts in front of you at the supermarket. An aggressive response would be to assume they did it on purpose and angrily. Say, "Hey, jackass, no cuts." A passive response, like of a shy person, would be just let the person stay in front of you. And an assertive response would be to assume that they may not have seen you in line and politely say, "Excuse me, but I was in line." That's being assertive. It makes you less stressed. It doesn't provoke some of the fights in the long run or aggressiveness in the long run. And it's just very polite. Scenario B, your friend, who can be quite verbose, calls to vent about her bad day. Unfortunately, you have a lot of work to do and don't have time to talk. An aggressive response would be to become angry that she obviously doesn't respect your time. Cut her off and sarcastically say, "Oh, get over it. I have my own problems." A passive response would be to let her talk for as long as she needs and figure out that your deadline can suffer because of her venting. Assertive response would be to listen for a minute or two, then compassionately say, "Wow, it sounds like you're having a bad day. I'd love to talk to you about it, but I don't have time right now. Can we talk later tonight?" So this response will be will affect positively affect many areas of your life, because assertive people tend to have fewer conflicts in the dealings with others, which translates into much less stress in their lives. They get their needs met and help others get their needs met too. Having stronger, more supportive relationships virtually guarantees that in a bind, they have people they can count on, which also helps with stress management and even leads to a healthier body. So try to avoid passive behavior and always be assertive. That's a trick of communication. But being aggressive is not like the right way out. Okay, so perhaps people aim to avoid conflict by avoiding communication about their needs and feelings, but this behavior damages relationships in the long run, as I told you. They may feel like victims but continue to avoid confrontation, becoming increasingly angry until when they finally do say something, it comes out aggressively. The other party doesn't even know that there is the problem until the formerly passive individual virtually explodes. This leads to hard feelings, weaker relationships, and more passivity. Yeah, so when you pile and collect all your dissatisfaction, it leads not to a very good result. It leads to just explosion of all these emotions. So being assertive is another trick from me today to help you with your communication stuff. And let's have a look a little bit at verbal and non-verbal communication. So verbal, delivering using words and sounds. Non-verbal, all forms except words, like appearance, clothing, hairstyle, choice of colors, gestures, hand movements, winking, nodding. By the way, don't fidget like all the time like that. It creates some negative atmosphere. Also, tone of voice, paralanguage, pitch, your loudness, your intonation. If I provide you with flat intonation like, hello, how are you? I'm fine. And you? How are you? So, is it polite or rude? Can you type in the chat box? Eye contact, yeah. Don't keep an eye contact too much. Posture, arm crossing, leg crossing. This one don't do because a lot of people can consider it to be closed. Okay. Fine. And what I wanted to tell you at the end of our webinar, we are going to have a prize, and it's time for a little prize for you. I will explain you the first part of the phrase. The first person to type the correct answer will get the prize from me. So, the second word is language. The first word, you've like, no, flat intonation is not polite. Sorry, it's not polite. Flat intonation is rude. So provide some intonation, yeah, like, hello, how are you? Rise, fall. I'm fine, and you? Yeah, the intonation, rising and falling one, will provide the politeness of your, so it will show that you are interested in the speaker. Provide not flat, it rise, fall, rise, fall. Hello, how are you? How is your work? Good, fine, and you? Cool. So the second part is language. But the first part, you have to guess and write the whole phrase in the chat box, and you will get the prize. So the first part is a synonym to body language, is a synonym to non-verbal language. The hint is for you. In the Ukrainian, it sounds, this word is sounds like a couple, a girlfriend and a boyfriend, a wife and a husband. In English, it sounds like a couple in Ukrainian. Two people, yeah, a boyfriend and a girlfriend. It's language, but it's a synonym to body language, but it sounds in Ukrainian like two people, yeah, a couple, a boyfriend and a girlfriend, two people. So who will be the first? Who will be the first to write correct answer? It's a body language, but the word itself sounds like a couple in Ukrainian. Can you type in the chat box? And you'll get the prize for being active today, for being for listening to the webinar. So the prize will be yours. You can see this word, by the way, on the slide. So what's the word? Please type in the chat box. I'm waiting. a language, a body language, which, oh, who is it? Oh, Vlad, congratulations, very good. Vlad received the prize today. Thanks for being active. Thanks for participating in the webinar, and you will get your prize. Everybody, don't be disappointed who didn't receive the prize. We are going to have such gift sessions throughout summer, throughout our summertime for being active. So don't be disappointed because of that. And Vlad, I'm writing the name. Vlad gets the prize today. Thanks a lot for today. I wish it was helpful for you. And have a nice weekend. Have a nice long weekend and see you the next week. Bye-bye.